As I've already gone over in several videos at this point, until the mid-2010s, it seemed that one thing Disney could not do wrong was the bad guy. And that's really not an exaggeration either, as quite a few Disney villains have actually been ranked in several places as being among the best of all time. That's how great they used to be. Now, there are obviously many different reasons for why the bad guy in most Disney movies was generally considered good, and I've already tackled most of them in another video, which you can find a link in the description to. But today, I'd like to focus on a slightly different aspect to many Disney villains that definitely helped add to their appeal. And that would, of course, be the Disney villain Song. Because let's face it, when talking about a musical, a character can really only be as iconic as the music they're given. And this is something that Disney has managed to knock out of the park time and time again. But now would probably be a good time to give my obligatory spoiler warning, as there will be spoilers for quite a few Disney movies ahead. So in case there's a particular one you don't want ruined, you might just want to be on the lookout. You have been warned. Okay, so to start on a slightly different note than usual, it is true that not all Disney villains have a song in their respective movies and still manage to be great in spite of that. But the thing is, even that can actually be to their benefit because it helps emphasize just how evil and seriously they're treated by the narrative. Such villains as the evil queen from Snow White, the evil stepmother from Cinderella, Maleficent from Sleeping Beauty, Shang Yu from Mulan, and many others all benefit from not having a song because it makes the threat they pose seem all the greater, which is then only compounded by the extremely menacing music that tends to play in the background when these characters are the center of attention. My point is, even when Disney actively chose for a villain not to have a song, it only serves to make them better. I mean, could you really imagine the likes of Lady Tremaine or Maleficent breaking out into song? Because one has to admit, they might not have seemed so dang intimidating if they had, unless the song in question was unimaginably creepy. And please do note that what I'm saying here doesn't apply to villains that don't come from musicals, as it's obviously a given in those cases that they won't have a song. Though in at least a few cases they arguably would have benefited from having one. But to get to the heart of the matter, the point is that when Disney villains do have a song, it's not easily forgotten, and that is honestly the main purpose of such a song. Whether it's to spell out the villain's motivation, make their personality flaws very obvious to the viewer, or even just to help advance the plot along, they make sure the audience does not forget it. And what's particularly notable here is that not only do most Disney villain songs do their job perfectly, but there arguably isn't a single one that isn't good, always being both great to listen to and only making their respective villains even more entertaining and charismatic in the process. I mean, be prepared, Poor Unfortunate Souls, Gaston, the Mad Madam Mim, the Elegant Captain Hawk, the World's Greatest Criminal Mind, Trust in Me, Hellfire, Friends on the Other Side, and countless others I haven't even listed. Is anybody really going to argue that any of these songs aren't amazing? And only help serve to make the villains in question even more epic, iconic, and memorable? Especially because in many of these cases, these songs often go on to heavily define how the audience sees their respective villains long after their movie is over. I mean, How many people immediately think of Hellfire when Frollo is mentioned? Or Ka's iconic number and hypnotic powers whenever he's brought up? The point is, when it comes to the villain, Disney has always had an exceptional talent for making them all the more memorable and entertaining through their musical numbers, particularly because they are usually among, if not the, best in the entire movie. And even if you look at Disney villain songs that aren't considered quite up to their standards, they usually are still by no means considered bad. I mean, Mother Knows Best, for example, might seem a little generic and low-key compared to classic Disney villain songs, but it's still a good song. And then the reprise in the forest easily redeems it of any flaws it has, being the perfect representation of Gothel's wicked nature and easily standing alongside Disney's best. And there's also This Is the Thanks I Get, which even with a couple of odd or redundant lyrics, is actually still pretty good all things considered. Really, it's probably the best song in the entire movie, which only further proves my point here. That at least as of this video, there isn't really a single Disney villain song that can actually be considered bad. And for a company that's been around for so long, that's a pretty impressive achievement. But it's not just the songs themselves that Disney clearly has a talent for when it comes to the villains, but music in general. And for an excellent example of that, with Man, the infamously unseen villain of Bambi, the audience is always tipped off to his presence by an ominous theme that starts playing. And just like with many a song, that helps make Man all the more memorable, despite the fact that he doesn't even appear on screen. Though, granted, the fact that he killed Bambi's mother was always going to give him that particular distinction. And there's also Chernabog, who, thanks to the nature of Fantasia, never utters a single word, but he doesn't need to. The visuals and horrifying music make it crystal clear just how evil and terrifying he really is. Now, sure, in this case the music had already been long written, and he was animated to it, but the point still remains that the way the characters and music interact makes for one heck of a bad guy. And there are also more low-key examples of this as well, such as right at the end of A Girl Worth Fighting For, when everything suddenly becomes dead silent and only a slight foreboding tune creeps in. And many have noted that perfectly sums up the sheer terror that Shang Yu evokes whenever his presence is merely felt, and shows the audience better than any musical number why he's so feared by all. And finally, there's also the fact that a villain doesn't even need to be the one singing the song for it to leave a lasting impression on the audience. And the most famous example of that would definitely be Cruella de Vil. She never sings a word of her own theme song, but it's still considered by many to be one of the best in Disney history, because it simply sums up the character and the feelings she evokes so well, and not to mention is extremely catchy to boot, so it doesn't matter who is actually singing it. And the same applies to a lesser extent with other villains as well. Just because their song isn't sung by them doesn't mean it can't help them along, or just simply be great songs on their own merits either. Okay, so the point here is that most of the time, Disney villain songs are honestly just as perfect as the villains who sing them. And there really isn't a single bad one of the bunch, with all of them not only being great songs on their own, but also perfectly do their job when it comes to setting up their respective villains. And honestly, it may just have been Disney's lack of musicals, and therefore villain songs, that may have made for yet another reason that they started to have a villain problem in the mid 2010s. Because as quite a few movies have shown, a good villain song can sometimes redeem a subpar villain. And a lot of their output from that era didn't even have that to try and fall back on. So, simply put, a lack of great villain songs that all of the best Disney villains had in one form or another can arguably be piled on to the list of reasons why the majority of Disney villains from the new millennium haven't been up to snuff, with the few that did have songs being among the more popular ones on top of that, which is only further proof of just how valuable in establishing the bad guy they really can be. Okay, I think that was everything I wanted to cover. So now I'd like to hear what you guys think. Do you believe that classic Disney villain songs were a major contributing factor to why Disney villains are often considered so iconic and memorable, and that Disney's more recent villains have started to suffer from a lack of them? Or do you believe that has nothing to do with it? Please feel free to let me know in the comments below. And just like always, you do not have to agree with me or anything I said in this video if you don't want to. If you think that every single Disney villain song is horrible and had no bearing on the popularity of the villains themselves, that is absolutely 100% fine. And thank you all for watching. I very much appreciate it, and I hope to see you all next time.